16 B-25 bombers sitting on the deck of an aircraft carrier. Nobody had ever launched a twin-engine bomber from a carrier before. Nobody knew if it would work. The pilots knew they couldn't land back on the deck afterward. This was a one-way mission with almost no chance of survival. 4 months after Pearl Harbor, Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle was about to lead 80 men on the most audacious raid in military history, and every single one of them volunteered, knowing they probably wouldn't come home. January 1942. President Roosevelt was furious. The Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor, conquered the Philippines, and were advancing everywhere. He demanded immediate retaliation against the Japanese homeland, but America had no bases within bomber range of Japan. Navy Captain Francis Lowe came up with an idea so crazy it might work: launch Army Air Force bombers from a Navy aircraft carrier. The Army didn't have carrier-capable planes. The Navy's carrier planes couldn't carry enough bombs to matter. But what if they could modify medium bombers to take off from a carrier deck? They'd never be able to land back on it, but they could bomb Japan and escape to China. The mission would be extremely hazardous. Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle, a legendary pilot and engineer, volunteered to lead what became Special Aviation Project No. 1. 24 B-25 crews trained at Eglin Field in Florida under absolute secrecy. Lieutenant Henry Miller, a Navy instructor, taught Army pilots how to take off from a carrier deck, even though none of them had ever done it. The crews stripped their B-25s of everything non-essential to save weight: lower gun turrets, radios, even armor. They practiced short takeoffs over and over, trying to get airborne in 467 feet, the distance they'd have on the carrier deck. A normal B-25 needed over 1,000 feet. The volunteers didn't know the target yet, but they knew the mission would be a one-way trip. 16 crews were selected for the actual raid. They loaded onto USS Hornet on April 2, 1942, and the task force headed toward Japan. April 18, 1942, at 7:38 a.m. The Hornet was still 650 miles from Tokyo when lookouts spotted a Japanese picket boat. The element of surprise was blown. Admiral Halsey sent the signal: "Launch planes, good luck and God bless you." They were 170 miles farther from Japan than planned. Fuel would be critical. The B-25s would be flying on fumes by the time they reached China. Doolittle's plane was first. The carrier pitched in heavy seas. At the right moment, the deck crew gave the signal, and Doolittle pushed the throttles forward. The bomber roared down the deck and lifted off with feet to spare. All 16 B-25s launched successfully. They'd done something that wasn't supposed to be possible. The bombers hit Tokyo, Yokohama, Kobe, Osaka, and Nagoya around noon. Japanese civilians had been told their capital was invulnerable to air attack. They stood in the streets watching in shock as American bombers flew overhead at rooftop level. Fighter opposition was minimal. Japan had been caught completely off guard. The raiders dropped their bombs on steel mills, oil tank farms, power plants, and military facilities. One bomb damaged the aircraft carrier Ryuho under construction, delaying its completion by months. Physical damage was light, but the psychological impact was massive. The Japanese homeland had been violated. Their military leadership had failed to protect them. 15 B-25s headed for China in darkness, flying on fumes with no navigation aids. One crew diverted to the Soviet Union and was interned for over a year. The rest flew blind through storms toward landing fields that were supposed to have guide lights. The lights never came on. Crews ran out of fuel over occupied China and either bailed out or crash-landed. 3 men died. 1 drowned after bailing out. 2 were killed in crashes. The surviving crews scattered across hundreds of miles of Chinese territory, not knowing if they'd land among friends or Japanese occupation forces. Local Chinese civilians risked everything to rescue the American airmen. Families hid them from Japanese patrols. Villagers guided them through mountains to safety. The grateful Americans gave the Chinese everything they had: money, watches, gear. 71 raiders made it to safety because of Chinese courage. Then Japan launched a massive retaliation campaign. The Japanese military systematically destroyed every village and town that had helped the Americans. They killed an estimated 250,000 Chinese civilians in revenge. Entire communities were wiped out with chemical weapons and fire. The people who saved American lives paid with their own. 8 Doolittle raiders were captured by Japanese forces. They were taken to Tokyo and subjected to a mock trial where they were accused of war crimes for bombing civilian areas. No evidence was presented. No defense was allowed. The outcome was predetermined. On October 15, 1942, 3 of them, Lieutenants Dean Hallmark, William Farrow, and Sergeant Harold Spatz, were executed by firing squad. Farrow's last letter to his mother said, "Don't let this get you down." Lieutenant Robert Meader died of starvation and disease in captivity. The remaining 4 survived until liberation in 1945, weighing less than 100 pounds each. Japan never officially acknowledged the executions until after the war ended. The physical damage from the raid was minimal. A few buildings burned. Some factories took minor hits. But the psychological and strategic impact changed the entire Pacific War. Japanese citizens realized their military couldn't protect them. The leadership was humiliated that enemy bombers had penetrated to the heart of their empire. This embarrassment pushed Japan toward the aggressive Midway operation in June 1942, where they suffered a catastrophic defeat that turned the war. Japan was forced to keep fighter squadrons defending the homeland, instead of sending them to the front lines. American morale soared. The raid proved Japan could be hit and would be hit again. Jimmy Doolittle received the Medal of Honor. He expected to be court-martialed for losing all 16 aircraft. Instead, he became a national hero. 69 of the 80 Doolittle raiders survived the war. They held reunions for decades, drinking a toast from silver goblets engraved with their names. When only 2 raiders remained alive, they opened the bottle of cognac that had been saved since 1942 and drank to their fallen brothers. The physical damage from the raid was negligible, but it changed history. It led directly to the Battle of Midway, the turning point of the Pacific War. It cost 250,000 Chinese lives, but proved that Japan could be reached and hurt. 80 men volunteered for a suicide mission, and most of them came home. They didn't win the war, but they showed America how to fight it. Sometimes the smallest spark starts the biggest fire, and the Doolittle raid lit a fire that burned all the way to Tokyo Bay in 1945.